If you want to play more melodic blues solos which really fit the sound of the 12-bar blues, then stay tuned. Hi, James here and welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's lesson. Now I'm going to show you something really cool today because I'm going to show you a simple thing you can start to do right away to really help your blues licks and solos fit the sound of the chords you're playing over. Now if you think about it, the 12-bar blues uses 3 different chords. Wouldn't it be cool if we can really match the sound of what we're playing at any point to the underlying chord, just to really help our solos stand out and sound more melodic? So I'm going to show you a couple of simple things you can do today to begin doing that right away. If you enjoy my blues lessons, then remember to check out my 2-book series, Blues Soloing for Guitar. It takes you through 10 complete solo studies with analysis and breakdown, teaching you all the essential knowledge and techniques you need to play great blues. Okay, so 2-book series, complete with video lessons, backing tracks, everything. I'll put a link in the description below this video. You can check it out and see if it's going to help you become a better blues player. We're going to be working in the key of G for this lesson, and a 12-bar blues in the key of G uses 3 dominant 7th chords. It uses G7, it uses C7, and it uses D7. So over the G7 chord of the sequence, we're going to emphasize some of the notes which are in the G7 chord. I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. Over the C7 chord, we're going to emphasize some of the notes in the C7 chord. Over the D7 chord, we might do that, but we might also do something a little bit different, which I'll tell you about later on. Now, one thing to understand is the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. These are the 2 notes which really express the sound of the chord. They're often called the guide tones. So the 3rd and the 7th of the dominant 7th chord are the 2 notes that really make it sound like a dominant 7th. So over the G7 chord, it could be a good idea to really emphasize in our licks the 3rd and the 7th of the G7 chord. When it goes to the C7 chord, it'd be a good idea to emphasize the 3rd and the 7th of the C7 chord. And that's going to really make whatever we play on those chords really match those chords in a really strong way. Now you can do this by learning modes and arpeggios and all sorts of things, and that's all worth doing, but I want to show you a bit of a shorter and quicker way to do it, which is not only easier to get the hang of, but it's also a great way to work this in with what you're already doing. You see, the danger is we go off and learn mode patterns and arpeggios and then we just start playing up and down them. But what if we can take everything you're already doing, like all your pentatonic licks and blues scale playing, and just change it or just modify it slightly to sort of sneak in these guide tones or these 3rds and 7ths as well? That's a really good approach, and that's what we're going to be doing now. So let's start by mapping out our 3rd and 7th on the G7 chord and looking at how we can squeeze that into our minor pentatonic scale. If we take this G7 chord here, the 3rd and 7th are on the D and the G string. Our flat and 7th is here on the 3rd fret on the D, and our 3rd is here on the G string at the 4th fret. Now the flat and 7th is already in the minor pentatonic scale, and we'll see that in a second. But first of all, let's just move that around a couple of different octaves. So let's take this D string note here, this is the 7th. Let's move it up an octave and it goes up to the 6th fret on the B string. We could also move it down an octave if we wanted. So there's our 7th, okay? The 3rd fret on the D string, the 6th fret on the B string, and the 1st fret on the low E. The 3rd is here on the G string at the 4th fret. Let's move that down an octave to the 2nd fret on the A string. We could also move it up an octave to the 7th fret on the top E string. So what we now have are our 3rds and our 7ths for a G7 chord. Okay, now that doesn't sound very bluesy, I admit. But imagine if we were to take some of those notes and fit them in with our blues scale or our minor pentatonic scale. See, then it still has that bluesy flavour, but just has that slight different sound from the guide tones as well. Now you've probably already spotted that the 7th of G7 is in the G minor pentatonic or G blues scale anyway. There it is there, and there it is there. So you're already using that one. So what we can do to get the 3rd and the 7th of G7 is simply take our G minor pentatonic scale and add that major 3rd, the 3rd of G7, add it in there, and we get a scale which will kind of fit the sound of the G7 chord a little bit better. And we can do this without having to go off and learn lots of mode patterns and arpeggio things. You can just stick that note into the stuff you're already doing, and it's just going to help you match your licks to the G7 chord a bit more. Now a good example for doing this is just to play your minor pentatonic scale and then just see if you can spot your 3rds and 7ths. Then play the scale again, maybe coming down, and see if you can spot your 3rd and 7th again. And this will start to help you start to see the overlap between them. Okay, you'll be able to just drop them into your blues licks, which is the whole idea here. Once you've got the hang of that, I would suggest recording a G7 chord on a looper or in a backing track software and just practice improvising just over the G7 chord using this approach. So I'm going to do that for you now. You'll see I'm kind of sticking within my pentatonic box shape here, but I'm just going to start sneaking in this major 3rd as well. Maybe this one too, although this is probably the one I'll use the most, and I might even get that one in as well. So let's see what we get. You can maybe hear how it has a slightly sweeter sound than the more bluesy sound of the minor pentatonic. Now let me show you a couple of simple ideas just to help you get started with these. Probably the most common example of doing this is this kind of slide here. I'm sliding from 3 up to 4 on the G. I'm sliding from the minor 3rd here up to the major 3rd, or the 3rd of G7. There it is, we're going from the minor pentatonic note up to the note that's in the chord. Now, the nice thing about this is if you think you have a blues lick which maybe does this, what about swapping this note for that note? I'm actually putting that little slide in too. Yeah, quite a handy little lick there. So experiment with that one. Another example of that would be doing this kind of thing. One of the most common ways to start a blues solo. So you may have been using this move already, and now you know where it comes from. It's a minor 3rd going up to the major 3rd, which is in the G7 chord. That lick again was sliding here. Real blues cliche, but still sounds cool. Now another idea you can look at is what's called enclosure. And this is where we enclose this 3rd here with the notes either side of it in the minor pentatonic scale. So if it's at the 4th fret on the G, we've got a note at the 5th fret on the G, and we've got a note at the 3rd fret on the G. Enclosure is where we kind of play the notes either side of that 3rd and then land on the 3rd. You probably heard that kind of idea. So we might have a lick like this. I'm playing the B string at the 3rd fret, then I'm going to the G at 5, down to 3 as the enclosure, and then landing on the 3rd. So the thing to do is put on your G vamp and just try working some of those ideas in there. Just start off really simple, see how they sound, and don't forget you can also still use your minor pentatonic and blues scale stuff as well. Just see if you can work some of these new ideas in there as well. So that's our G7 chord, the 1 chord in the key of G. But a really important move is the move to the 4 chord, which in the key of G is C7. So let's look at where our 3rds and 7ths are on the C7 chord now, and then I'm going to show you a really cool way to work those into your G blues soloing. Let's think of this C7 chord here, or maybe this C7 chord here. So here's our C root. Our third is here on the D string at the 2nd fret, and the flat 7 is on the 3rd fret on the G string. Now you might even notice they're 1 fret down from the G ones, and this is something we can use, but we'll come back to that later on. Now if we move those up an octave and down an octave, we get a pattern that looks like this. We have the flat 7 of C, 3rd of C7, the flat 7 of C7, the 3rd, and the flat 7 again. One of the best ways to get the sound of your 4-chord 3rd and 7ths is, instead of playing G minor pentatonic, play G minor 6 pentatonic. G minor 6 pentatonic is simply swapping the flat 7 of G here for the 6. Now the 6th here is the 3rd of the C7 chord. So if we change our pattern from this to this, there's our 3rd of C7. The flat 7's already in the scale anyway. There's our 3rd. So if we just go from G minor pentatonic into that scale, that's going to give us the C7 3rd and 7th in there anyway. So the next step is to record a C7 chord and practice using that G minor 6 pentatonic over the top of it. You can kind of use all the familiar blues licks and things that you use. Just try and swap that note out for the note we've changed here to really make your licks fit the sound of the C7 chord. So just to sum up, we've taken our G minor pentatonic scale and we've snuck our major 3rd in there to really fit the sound of the G7 chord. When it goes to C7, we're kind of still thinking G minor pentatonic, but we're just changing that one note in the minor pentatonic scale, and that's going to fit the C7 chord much better. So what we're getting here is quite a compact little approach, which is easy to modify rather than jumping to lots of different scales and things. Now let's hear what that sounds like over the first part of 12 bar blues in G when I switch between those approaches. Have a go at this too using a backing track, but what you probably going to want to do first is get really comfortable at playing over those chords individually before you try and sort of connect them up over the 12 bar blues. And one more little tip I just want to share: the 3rd of G7 sounds terrible on the C7 chord, so you don't want to play this note on the 4 chord. However, this note, the 3rd of C7, sounds great on the 1 chord, so you might hear me use that a little bit on the G chord as well. Okay, let's have a little listen to what it sounds like over the first couple of bars of the 12 bar blues in the key of G now. So that's the general approach there, okay? Now you might notice sometimes I'm just playing standard type blues licks and things, and we don't want to forget that approach. That's the basics at the start and always sounds really good. But we can just modify what we're playing ever so slightly just to sneak a few different sounds in there. Now one thing we haven't talked about yet is the 5 chord. In the 5 chord in the key of G is D7. Now we could, if we wanted to, find the 3rds and the 7ths on the D chord and start targeting those, but I think we're going to leave that for another video. And the reason for this is because actually the blues scale and the minor pentatonic scale, so G minor pentatonic in this case, has a really nice edgy sound over that 5 chord, and it sets up some nice tension and really pulls you back to the start of the sequence well. It also simplifies the approach a little bit because we don't have to do anything special on the D7 chord at the moment. You can get used to this approach and then worry about that later on. So the sort of strategy we're taking here is on the G chord, you can play G minor pentatonic with your 3rd snuck in there. On the C7 chords, you're just going to switch that scale round to G minor 6 pentatonic, And when it's time for the 5 chord, the D7 chord, you're back on G blues, G minor pentatonic. So really, you've only got to switch a couple of times over the C chord. And this makes it really easy to actually be musical with this approach, rather than chasing lots of scale patterns around the neck. I'm going to play over the 12-bar blues for you one more time now, so you can really hear these ideas. I'm going to keep it very simple, try and keep the melodies really obvious. Listen out for on the D chord, when I go to my blues scale, where you get that nice edgy sound over the 5 chord on the D7 chord, okay? Hopefully you can hear there how it gives you some different flavors and different sounds. There's a little bit of variety. It can just really freshen up your playing. And the great thing about it is it's such a simple approach to use, because you're just changing your scale on the C chord really. Rest of the time, you're pretty much sticking to the same thing. You're just maybe sneaking that major third in on the G7 chord. Again, I want to emphasize this idea of experimenting with these concepts on individual chords. Get used to playing this over your G7, then on your C7, and then practice switching between them, and then start working it in over 12-bar blues. And you don't have to do this loads, you can just use it a little bit. It'll still just create a bit of contrast and a bit of freshness in your playing. And don't forget all the essential things for playing a good solo, leaving some space, using some call and response, sort of repetition, these kind of ideas. These can really help your solo to kind of make sense musically to the listener, rather than sounding like just someone playing a load of notes. So I hope this lesson's helped you out. Leave a comment below, let me know how you found it. And remember to check out my Blues Soloing for Guitar Volume 1 and Volume 2 books, which covers a few of these concepts in the second volume. You'll find a link to those in the description below this video. Other than that, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss all my future videos. Any requests for lessons, you can leave them underneath. And enjoy what we've looked at today. I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun experimenting, playing around with that. So be patient. Work these concepts into your playing gradually and they'll pay off. So have a great day and I'll catch you next time.